Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 176, where we're going to talk about internal overstimulation. What is that? You'll find out in a moment. But first, I want to say happy holidays to everyone and happy New Year. The thing I love about New Year's is that it makes us oftentimes think of how we want to consciously proceed with our lives. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, because when you're conscious about how you want to proceed with your life, you make your life more of what you want it to be. So I hope this episode will help with that. And on that note, I have a special announcement, which is that starting January 15th, I will no longer be accepting one-on-one clients for the foreseeable future, maybe like 6 months, maybe a little longer, kind of depends. I'm going on sabbatical and I'm not giving myself an end deadline for that. So here's why this matters for you. If you've been interested in coaching with me, if you've been kind of thinking about it, but you haven't bit the bullet yet, now is the time. I have some spots open for one-to-one coaching with me. That's my 4-month program, where we dive deep into your relationship and we really hone in on making it the loving, supportive, collaborative, connected one that you want. So as of the release of this episode, you have about 3 more weeks before you miss your chance to coach with me for many months to come. So even if you're not 100% sure you want to do it, I highly recommend filling out the Great Mutual Fit form. That's just my form that helps you feel out if it's a good fit for you and me to feel out if it's a good fit for you as well. So I'm going to put that in the link in the show notes. Once you fill that out, we can email further. We can hop on a call to answer any more questions you might have and just make sure it's a great fit for you. And if it is, we'll get going and really transform your marriage so that you feel so much better in it. So don't delay, don't miss out. I can't wait to see you feeling so much better in your marriage. All right, so several of my recent podcast episodes have focused in on the nervous system, your nervous system states, and how emotionally regulated or dysregulated we can be as people, and how that dysregulation affects us, and of course, some of what you can do about it. And in my program that I've been currently running, Foundations of Emotional Well-Being for Hsps, the participants in the program have been doing amazing work and making beautiful shifts and feeling so much better by working directly with their nervous systems, by learning how to do that, and by really communicating with their nervous systems in a way that really soothes them. But we are getting to the point in the program where I need to address the other primary thing that creates and keeps compounding dysregulation. So today I want to share this, and it's something that's a bit surprising, that creates extra stress, that puts us into overstimulation and nervous system dysregulation. And this ties a lot of things together that I teach about. And what I'm sharing today is less talked about than much of the other teachings that I've shared on the nervous system. Plus, it's been coming up a whole lot in client sessions, in my one-on-one client sessions lately. So I'd say it's perfect timing to share about this. So background is that as highly sensitive people, we're especially sensitive to overstimulation and stress. Probably all of you are like, yep, that's me. So when stressful things happen in our lives, like simple things, like maybe being late to an appointment or working in an overly bright office for too long, or maybe bigger stressors like when a president you fear will make your and other lives worse is elected, or you just have a long list of to-dos and no break to catch your breath. or your relationship is fraught with little spats and discord, or your kids are blasting rap music and you got overly ambitious and tried to cook 4 dishes at the same time for dinner. And oh boy, it was just way too much multitasking. Ever done that? I certainly have. Anyway, you get the idea. When these bigger or littler sorts of things are going on, as they tend to do in our lives, we will often find ourselves overstimulated or stressed or frazzled or, overloaded, whatever you want to call it. And really what's happening when we're feeling like that, when we're feeling stress or other strong emotions, we are going into a threat state in our nervous system, right? We move out of the home state, the common connect state of safety, and into a protective threat state. I sometimes call that the SOS states, or of course, fight, flight, or freeze. That's the other very common way of putting that. Now, as I've shared a bunch recently, this being in these threat states is really terrible for relationship health, as well as for emotional health and just life in general. I mean, being in them temporarily is totally fine. Being in them infrequently, occasionally, for short moments of time is fine, and that's appropriate and what's supposed to be happening with our nervous system. But when we're chronically there or we're there a lot, it's terrible for our relationship and our emotional well-being, because it's from these threat states that your thinking gets impaired, right? That higher thinking brain, your wiser true self, becomes inaccessible, and you feel disconnected from your heart. And reflection and responsiveness and clarity are replaced with reaction and difficult emotions and confusion. You'll likely feel cranky, irritable, anxious, fuzzy-brained, impatient, and your capacity for positive growth, for learning and change, as well as open, understanding communication is shut down. And of course, as we've talked about in the recent episodes on the nervous system, from that place, we aren't great partners. We tend to behave in ways that we later feel bad about, and in ways that tend to elicit defensive reactions from our partner, tend to lead to arguments and impasses in our relationships. Now, it's so easy to blame this overstimulation, this stress, these falling into these threat states, this dysregulation of our nervous system on external things, on things that are going on outside of ourselves, like the rap music our kids won't stop playing, right? Or the bright lights at the office, or the fact that over 50% of the country voted for a president that we abhor, or your husband being grumpy with you. But what we overlook so often is the effect of what I call internal overstimulation. Because in reality, so much of the stress, the overstimulation that is happening for you is generated internally. In fact, in many cases, more of it is coming from your internal world than from the external world. Now, I could go into why that's the case. It's a little bit complicated, and it basically has to do with how your brain and nervous system have interpreted life over time, like your personal history, and how that life experience has contributed to what I call your personal filter, and how that leads to your unique interpretation of things that happen outside of you. Things that may not be a problem at all for another person might be very stressful for you, based on how your personal brain, your personal mind, body, heart system filters reality. But without going further into the details of all that, the reality is that for all of us, our internal world, how we filter information, how we filter life experience, is the most important factor in how much stress we feel or don't feel. Unless you're living in a truly toxic, abusive situation. So, if you feel shut down or irritable or confused, or like your emotional cup is so full it's spilling over, or if you feel more full of negative or difficult emotions than you ever used to, if you feel stressed or other hard emotions about your relationship, it's worth looking inward to see how what's going on within you is adding more stress and struggle to your life. Because all of us do this to some or greater degree, unconsciously, of course. And as I've been teaching my group in Foundations of Emotional Well-Being, this internal overstimulation comes in part from how our nervous system becomes overly overloaded in our modern lives because of how busy, fast-paced, and full our lives are, and how we don't know how to work with our nervous systems to kind of keep them quote-unquote clean. Like an analogy here would be a computer with too many programs running at the same time and too many tabs open, right? If you ever had a computer where you did that, it just goes into overload mode and starts to freeze, right? It can't function properly when we're asking it to do too much at once. This is kind of how our nervous system works in a sense as well. It's like we've clogged it with too much stimulation and it can't function properly. And it goes into dysregulation. And so when we work directly with our nervous system, there's a lot of things we can do to clean it out, to give it more space on our hard drive and make it happy, regulated, and super functional again. So all of that is huge, and most people don't know how to do that. And this is the primary thing we're focusing on in Foundations of Emotional Well-Being. There's a very special layered process to do this work, to clean it out, to regulate the nervous system. And again, that's what we're working on in Foundations of Emotional Well-Being. So if you're interested in that, definitely look for this 4-week program again in the future. It's been wonderful so far. But on top of this emotional hygiene work, we could call it, this emotional regulation work with working directly with our nervous systems, we also have to pay attention to the fact that some of the things that are pushing us into overload are not those external things. They're not our husband's tone of voice. They're not your to-do list, but the way we think about these external things. So to illustrate this, one of my one-to-one clients has been really good at doing the nervous system work that I suggest. In fact, she'd been doing her own work on this well before she came to see me too. So one session, when she shared that she was finding herself more reactive with her partner again, I checked in about if she was feeling generally more dysregulated lately and whether she was keeping up with her nervous system work. And her response was that she felt she was more dysregulated, but that she was absolutely still doing tons of the nervous system work, and she couldn't imagine fitting more of it into her life. And that to do so, she'd have to do it all day. So we had a giggle about that, and then we looked deeper at what was going on for her. And with a little digging, we uncovered that because of some changes in her life for the last 6 months or so, she hadn't been doing a lot of the things that felt fulfilling or as interactive as she'd been used to doing. And here's the stressful part. She was telling herself that meant she doesn't have value to add to the world. In other words, how she was thinking about this situation was very stress and pain generating. She would have these types of thoughts fairly often, and it was making her feel bad about herself and stuck and against herself, which unsettled her whole system. One of the metaphors that I've been using in the Foundations of Emotional Well-Being is that if you were to think of yourself as a garden, when we have dysregulation, it's because our garden is so full of weeds that we can't grow any of the good stuff in our life. The weeds are choking out and overwhelming us. And so we have to pull the weeds to make space for the good things to grow in our life. One of the things that happens is that we keep planting more weeds by how we think about life, by how we think about ourselves, by how we think about our partner. So without figuring out how to stop planting more of those weeds, which is what this client was doing by having this thought or these types of thoughts, I don't add value to the world, I don't contribute anything to the world. Without learning how to stop thinking that way, the weeds are just going to keep coming. And we're going to be sitting there trying to pull them all out, and they're just going to be sprouting and sprouting and sprouting, right? It's going to be like, is it Hsps who pushes that rock up the hill forever and ever and ever? So the point here is that our thinking tends to generate an enormous amount of stress and pain. And it dysregulates our mind, body, heart systems. It dysregulates our nervous systems and sends us into threat states, right? Our thinking in and of itself. And then those threat states only trap us in murky and painful thinking even more. And our negativity bias and our flaw sight rear their heads, and we start misinterpreting reality in a much more negative, threatening, painful way. And this clouds our thinking even more and dysregulates our nervous system even more. So it's a vicious, vicious cycle. And not only that, from these threat states, we act more cantankerous, more judgy, more controlling, more snappy, more irritable with our partner. And this, of course, can just lead to more fights or misunderstandings and icky communications and interactions with our spouse and others too, of course. And down we go, this slippery slope. Another way to think about this is it's kind of like our own thinking, our own thoughts can be like a tiger within us prowling on the loose. One that we might not even see is there, but we're reacting to anyway. Our own thinking can create a constant sense of stress, fear, pressure, lack of safety, and it cuts us off from a sense of real belonging and connection and love. I see this every single day with my clients in one way or another, and I certainly know the experience personally. Now, this all is, of course, backed by research. Research shows that thoughts create stress. So, for example, one interesting study shows that self-criticism, right, when we're thinking negative, mean thoughts about ourselves or critical thoughts about ourselves, that activates the defense mechanisms. In other words, our threat states of fight, flight, or freeze. Put yet another way, our own minds can be like minefields. We may stumble upon a thought or perception as we go about our daily life that will send us instantly into an explosion of emotions and stress in any given moment. And we don't always know when that's going to happen. So I say we may stumble upon a thought or a perception because, yes, some of this is coming from thoughts like sentences in our minds, or another word is beliefs that we might have, such as my client's belief, I add no value to the world. So she was able to hear that thought. And that is one of the first skills I help my clients learn how to do, to see and hear and listen to what they're actually thinking, to observe that, to become aware of that. But our thoughts and perceptions can also be more subtle, at least at first. They can be more under the surface thoughts, unconscious perceptions, and even unconscious memories that get activated by certain cues in the outer world and throw us into a threat state. So it can seem like it's the outer world that's creating this threat state in us, like, again, the tone of voice your partner uses. But if you really slow down and look, most often it's either an unconscious memory of some other time when you were, say, very disrespected, or it's because of a belief or a thought, one perhaps that you've believed for so long that it's become what feels like a fact. For example, a client just today said she felt like her belief that her husband shouldn't watch TV all the time was true, was a fact, right? But notice that's just a belief. So when we slow down and look, we are actually able to see, oh, I'm believing this thing. Or the perception can also come from an association or an expectation that you have, which ultimately lead to our beliefs. So again, when we slow down and we develop the skills to really see, what we notice is that we have thoughts and beliefs that we can literally put into words with perhaps just a little bit of work that are creating intense emotions, that are throwing us into stress states. And the point is that this is happening within you. Without the filter of your perception, without whatever's happening outside of you, like your partner's tone of voice, without that passing through your own personal subjective filter, that tone of voice wouldn't lead to any stress or emotions in you. In other words, if you didn't have a thought about it, if you didn't have a belief about it, if you didn't have an implicit memory of someone being deeply disrespectful to you, it wouldn't trigger you into a threat state. It wouldn't activate a strong emotional reaction or even a minor emotional reaction. Now, we all have thoughts and beliefs and perceptions that will come up in response to a cue in the outer world, to something happening in the outer world that will generate these strong emotions, these strong emotional reactions, these threat states. But I want to give you some more concrete examples of what those thoughts and beliefs might actually look like or sound like. So some examples of common ones that I hear from clients are, he wouldn't speak to me like that if he cared about me. And something is wrong with me. And he doesn't love me. And he's a jerk. And why can't he just XYZ? Like, why can't he just get home on time? Or why can't he just hug me more often? So this is a tiny, tiny splattering of the bazillion thoughts that people can have that can create strong emotion, i.e. stress in the system. And you can see how these particular thoughts that I just shared would generate stress and put you into a threat state. Yeah? Like if you were thinking these thoughts, how would you feel? How would your body feel? Would you feel a little bit of charge? Would it put you into a shutdown threat state? Would it put you into a fight state where you kind of want to attack? It depends on you as a unique individual, how these thoughts would affect you. But I think most of you will see how all of these thoughts would be very activating in a not so pleasant way. So I want to invite you now to apply some of this to your own life. What thoughts do you have that throw you into a bit of a threat state? Now, I want you to notice that when I say threat state, it doesn't have to be the most extreme form of like, right? It can just be subtle stress in the system, like a sense of overload, a sense of stress, a sense of feeling a little bit more against your partner or mad at yourself or hurt or anxious or afraid for your future. And so I invite you to simply kind of put a radar on for those thoughts that just come up in your mind as you go about your life and things happen. So when you feel a charged emotion, simply notice, what am I thinking? What am I believing? This is how you're going to begin to see the thoughts that send you into fight, flight, or freeze. You can also notice by your actions. So if you find yourself snapping at your spouse, slow down and ask yourself, what am I thinking? What am I believing in this moment that's leading me to act this way? With practice, you're going to totally be able to see the thoughts that send you into threat states and that gets you behaving in ways that you ultimately don't really want to behave. So start doing that. Like set yourself this as a challenge for the next couple of days to just witness that in yourself. And I wanted to add a little bit more here about why this matters for relationships, why it's important to notice how we create our own stress by how we think, and why stress and dysregulation really hurts relationships. Of course, I've shared a lot about that, about how detrimental being in a threat state can be emotionally and for your relationship. But I want to add a little bit more. And that is that for most people, many of our thoughts and internal perceptions are actually related to our relationships or are about our partner or are about ourselves in our relationship. And this is especially true as highly sensitive women who are so relationship oriented. And what this means is that because our thoughts and internal perceptions are so oftentimes about our relationship in one way or another, or about how we are being in our relationship, or about how good we are or bad we are in our relationship, or about how good our partner is or bad they are in our relationship, right? It really means that our threat states may be especially activated in regards to our relationship. I know that when I first talk to women who are interested in coaching with me or who are beginning to coach with me, they so often tell me how the stress they feel in their relationship is affecting everything in their life, is bleeding out into everything in their life. But so much of it can be traced back. So much of the hard time that they're going through in their life originates in their relationship. And ultimately, when we dig down, they see in how they are thinking about things that are going on in their relationship, how they are thinking about their partner, how they are thinking about themselves within the relationship. And on top of that, when we're in these threat states, when you are in this threat state, when you are internally overstimulated or otherwise thrown into a threat state, whether the reason had anything to do with your spouse or not, this is what happens. You will miss cues of safety and love that are in the environment around you or that are coming from your partner, meaning you won't notice them. You'll be oblivious to them. This is one of the big reasons why this really matters for love. If you're feeling stressed or unsafe, that means if you're in a threat state, if you're dysregulated, receiving love is not at that moment a possibility, nor is giving it. You can't be truly empathetic or compassionate from a stress dysregulated state. You can't be open-hearted. You can't be present. And presence and open-heartedness is required for love, is required for connection, is required for beautiful communication. So if you're chronically in a threat state or dysregulated, which so many of us are, that means that giving and receiving love, which is the very basis of a great loving relationship, is very compromised. So no wonder so many relationships are so unhappy. Being in a threat state, feeling literally unsafe in your nervous system is the first and biggest obstacle to love. And unfortunately, that unsafety, that threat state, is something we generate so often from within our own minds, with our subconscious and even conscious thoughts. But my point here isn't just that. It's also that we are not helpless when it comes to our minds and our thinking. Yes, our brains think. It's what they do. They automatically just think, yeah? And maybe even more so as sensitive people. And we can't stop that. But we can learn to guide the content of those thoughts and beliefs. We can, in fact, instead of allowing our thoughts to stress us out or overstimulate and put us into emotional dysregulation, we can use our thoughts to soothe our nervous system by stewarding them, by guiding our thinking. In other words, in order to have the best emotional regulation and emotional well-being, as well as the best relationships, we need to learn to supervise and guide our own brains. Otherwise, our brains will control us and our emotions and our relationships in pain and suffering producing ways. So we need to learn how to guide our thinking. I actually believe both learning how to work directly with your nervous system and deeply caretaking it and guiding your own mind and thinking is essential for real well-being in general as a highly sensitive person, and definitely essential for relationship happiness. To return to the computer analogy for a moment, if you don't know how to guide your mind, body, heart system in these ways, right, your nervous system and your thinking, it's like having at your disposal a whole amazing computer with all sorts of programs and the capacity to create so many wonderful things on this computer, but you haven't learned how any of the programs really work and are just fumbling through trying to use one or two of them. So you're not succeeding at taking advantage of about 99.99% of what the computer could help you do in your life. And the part of it that you are taking advantage of, you're using in a way that is so much more complicated and frustration producing than if you actually knew the real operation instructions. If you just slowed down and studied the operation instructions and learned how to operate this computer, life and love would be so much easier, richer, and so much more fulfilling. In fact, for those of you who have been listening to the podcast for a while, do you remember the 3 phases of love that I've talked about? If not, you got to check out episode 116. But the disenchantment phase in relationships, the one most of you are in, the one people find themselves in kind of just by default in our culture after the honeymoon phase fades, right? The disenchantment phase is where like the challenges arise and you feel less and less happy and connected with each other. And you see more and more of the faults in this perfectly flawed human that you are with. Well, this I've noticed happens in most relationships. We fall into this disenchantment phase, and many relationships get stuck here and end here because it just gets so bad. But the reason that happens is because so many people don't know how to work with and supervise their brain and caretake their nervous system. They don't know how to skillfully operate this equipment, this mind, body, heart system that they have been gifted with. Because supervising, guiding, stewarding them is not a thing we know to do innately. It's not a thing we are taught in general in our society. And our brain and our nervous system, our minds and our nervous system need active supervision. They need active care from ourselves, from our wise selves, from our higher brain. They need active, loving guidance. And when we learn how to do that, we're able to move out of the disenchantment phase in our relationship and into what I call re-enchantment or real enchantment, which is not just a phase, but it's like what you get to live in for the rest of your life in your relationship. And it's really a more mature, evolved, deeper, and more genuine love with your spouse than you've known before, where you feel more love and connection and really this solid sense of being a loving team in life in a bigger way than you ever have. So learning how to guide your thinking and caretake your nervous system, in order to do that, there really is a simple sequence of steps. And for learning how to guide your thinking, this part of you that can really internally overstimulate and stress and dysregulate you, it really starts with observing your own thinking, as I suggested earlier in this episode. But it's one of those things that must be taught to go deeper with it in a very personalized way. So you can apply it to your unique life with your unique brain and your unique relationship. And this is why I don't teach this thought and belief guiding, this thought and belief work on the podcast. I have definitely given you bits and starting places, but going deep into your personal brain and your personal life and your personal relationship isn't possible for me to do with you, obviously, on a podcast. Of course, this is work we do at a deep level when you coach with me, guiding yourself out of survival states that keep you from love and into states and stories that open the door and walk you into love and connection, even when your partner is being a normal human who's not so perfectly skillful in love. That is one of the big things we do together when we coach together. So if you want a great emotional life, if you want peace, love, joy at a deeper level than ever in your relationship and in general in your life, come coach with me. There's no better time to start this journey at this turn of the new year. And remember, I will no longer be taking clients after January 15th for quite a while, for many, many months, as I take a little bit of time to focus on other areas of my life for a bit. So what this means for you is that if you are interested in coaching with me, do it now, especially if you feel at all disconnected. Please don't wait. There's a tendency for things to just get worse once that disconnection starts to creep in. I do have a few spots to start before January 15th. So don't hesitate to fill that form out, the Great Mutual Fit form, which I'm going to put the link in the show notes here. Fill that out, submit it, and from there we can figure out together if this is the right step for you right now. You can also learn more about coaching one-to-one with me at my website. It's hspmarriagecoaching.com. And there's a tab that says work privately with me. Just click on that one. It'll give you all the details. It will give you access to that form to submit as well, to initiate the coaching process with me. And I would be truly honored to support you in making your marriage the one you really want it to be, as well as just feeling so much better in general, emotionally. All right, my friends, I'm wishing you all the best in this turn of the year moment, and be oh so well.